Oh my gosh, look at that. It's a Linux video. What is happening?
A wild Linux appeared.
I've got some guests that I think, I want to say the cat drug in, but I've been trying to think of an appropriately southern, the biscuit joiner drug in. I don't know.
Yeah, we'd come for biscuits.
We're in the South, though, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm here with Chris and Alex.
Hi, Wendell. Hi,
They're,
guys.
they're doing a new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're launching a new show, which you've been very gracious to let us have you on.
Mm-hmm.
Although, probably this will come out before that, so...
Oh, well, the show's been announced.
Yeah.
So self-hosted is announced, so we can...
Yeah.
Yeah. We thought it was a really good excuse to come down here and visit. That's what we thought.
we went on for like an hour. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we thought we'll have Wendell on for a 20, 30-minute chat, talk about
No, I never thought that.
a few things. An interesting guy. I mean, it's not a surprise to anybody watching this video.
I was surprised we kept it as short as we did, truth be told.
Mm-hmm.
But,
So, yeah, we're in town today. There's a meet-up in Lexington this evening.
Yep.
We're going to go to have some pizza and meet some fans, hopefully.
Yeah,
of
yeah.
JB, of Wendell's stuff.
And we've been just talking Linux and walking around.
I like the
Yeah.
idea of self-hosted because I don't trust the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Old man yells at cloud.
Or even when you use the cloud, it's like there's still a way you could back up. There's still a way you can protect your data, encrypt your data. So we thought there's a lot to talk about.
With the cloud, though, I'm quite keen to tell people that you shouldn't rely on the cloud. But what is the cloud? Is it...
Other people's computers.
Well, here's the thing about that. Does that mean that you can't use DigitalOcean? Does that mean that you can't use Amazon?
Well, no, it's not that you can't use it. It's just that it's transient. It's like you're homeless. Like, you could really fix up that park bench in the park. But chances are, they're going to come through with a fire hose, and they're going to be real upset, and they're just going to hose that down, and then you're going to lose everything.
Cattle versus pets.
Yeah, they're going to want their bench back. You got to treat it like cattle. That's true. Yeah.
So then it brings... So when you buy a product, the business model is subsidized by the service or the metadata collection that it has. Like a thermostat, for example, from Nest or something. A lot in the purchase price of that product is the assumption they'll be able to mine your data and sell that to maybe an energy company or something for my heating and cooling preferences or what that is.
That's part of the problem is we don't even know.
Yeah.
You don't know what they're using it for.
Yeah, so when I say, I think when we say don't rely on the cloud, we mean don't rely on the cloud that you don't have root access to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You need to be responsible for your stuff.
Yeah, if I can't SSH into a server, I don't trust it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you can SSH into a server, you still have to take steps in order to protect it. And I think that's like a lot of people sort of ambiguously know, or like they know that, but they know that intrinsically, but they don't explicitly like realize these are the steps I need to take in order to protect my data or do this thing or whatever. Because even paid services, I mean, how many services has Google had that are paid that they're just like, we're not going to do this
done
anymore?
with that.
Yeah.
Paid or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, what was it, Waze or Wave? Google Wave?
Well, they bought it and then they changed it and
Yeah.
then it was different and then it was terrible and then they forgot what they were doing and then they were like, whoops.
And now they're getting rid of Hangouts too.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's weird though because if you pay for the G Suite Hangouts, you still get to use Hangouts. So I get, but they didn't announce that until later. They were like, "Oh darn, I guess we need to hang on to that,"
Yeah.
which is how it is with the cloud. The cloud might evaporate at any moment.
Yeah.
I like that.
That is a good way to put
Cloud
it.
might evaporate,
It's a good visual.
particularly as clouds are just evaporation.
I think one of the things that really worked out for starting a podcast like self-hosted is it's more approachable now. So if you want to replicate functionality from the cloud on your own systems, it's not like this massive investment in hardware and software now, like even just 5 years ago
Yeah.
it would have been. You can do it. You can literally run the same core software they're running up on the cloud.
Well, we did a video series on Sandstorm, which was, I thought, incredibly well put together. And it was a combination of like containerization for security, because it's like we don't trust, the services to be secure, but also making it approachable for newbies. But, from what I understand, they've had a really hard time commercializing it and like figuring out a path to success and that kind of thing. But eventually I see these kinds of things as being community plumbing, and especially like the advances that we've seen somewhat with Docker, but especially Kubernetes in the last 2 years it has been incredible. Like the containerization and like there's snaps. I don't think snaps is it, but there's snaps. I mean, philosophically maybe, but mechanically, but Kubernetes, especially Kubernetes on bare metal, and where that has come, like just the functionality enabled in the last 3 months, and having fleets of bare metal, that is probably where big data centers are going to go. Like in the beginning, there was Amazon and there were Lambda functions, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. But I think that like long term, it's probably bare metal and containerization. So like when you go to DigitalOcean, it's like, okay, we're going to give you this tiny slice of bare metal, but you're on your own for doing that, and that's just one component of your own infrastructure. That maybe that's your ingress and egress VM, and everything else is running at your house.
Mm-hmm. Could be a setup some people use today. Could be.
You know, the thing for me that made containerization make the most sense was I once reloaded my server and then pointed all my containers at the volumes after I'd reloaded it and had everything back up and running as it was within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, so this is what happens when I separate my application
Yep.
runtime from the state.
Yeah.
The sysadmin in me, I went through and I set it all up, and then I was like, I got to test this just once. And I deleted all of the Docker container applications, set them all back up with the same compose file, and reconnected them to the data. And it was just like I turned the app on and off.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I totally wiped them from the system.
It genuinely feels like magic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It also is a little bit scary because it's like, there's intruders inside my containers and I don't know it.
Yeah, there is kind of that unknown quantity about what's in the container.
Like the web application has been compromised, and like,
Oh, yeah.
are the logs attached to a data volume? Did I bother setting up syslog forwarding?
Yeah, it does allow you to be a bit too lazy sometimes.
Yes.
Because you don't, like in the old days, you used to have to understand Apache, how to set up a web server, etc. Whereas now I can do Docker run,
Yeah.
Right.
Nginx or whatever it is, and it's just up. And the only thing I've had to learn is maybe how to expose a port externally from a container, or maybe map a volume, but even that's optional sometimes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's an exciting time. There's honestly, these kinds of things I think are going to enable much better, Linux on the desktop experiences. And I think Snap, there are a lot of the like really awesomeness of what we're talking about. Things like Snap containers will enable for applications on the desktop, but it's not quite there yet, because it's not like the stuff that's happening server side is getting more and more polished with each iteration. And I don't think that we've really figured out the formula that covers every use case on the desktop yet. Whereas on the server, we've had to go through like 3 generations of containerization technology,
True.
and we're basically there now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this stuff plus like PCI pass-through with virtualization, the way things are going with AMD, and even though I'm a Linux guy, seeing what Microsoft is doing these days, like these particular like categories have me more excited about computing in general than I have been in years.
Yeah.
It's just getting really good and cool again.
I'm genuinely surprised that Intel hasn't suggested to like VMware as a mitigation strategy for Meltdown and Spectre and all of the various permutations of that, of which there are a lot, that as the hyperscaler security strategy is, you just run, like, these cores are reserved for privileged things, and anything that's not a privileged thing is not running on one of these cores because we just can't trust it.
Right. That does seem like a pretty solid solution.
Only if you've got 28 cores.
Well,
If you've got like 4 or 8 cores, that's going to be more than a performance hit than the patch.
Yeah. Thing is, as well, a lot of these technologies will translate to the Linux desktop with things like Fedora Silverblue coming through.
Yeah,
true.
that's exciting. That's like cubes, but like usable.
Yeah.
Maybe.
There's been one of the early Docker developers, Jessie Frazell, who I followed for a little while, and I think she's working at Google these days, but these things move fast. I could be wrong with that. She's been running like everything in containers on her laptop for years and years and years. So this is like 2015, way back. She was running Chrome in a container. And I was like, you're a madman. But then
It seems like a lot of extra work too.
But then you've got to worry about stuff like GTK theming not coming through properly, and it can be a whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work just right yet. It's not user friendly yet for that kind of stuff.
Not yet.
No.
Will be.
That's why I think snaps and flat packs might be a better solution for the desktop, because they're really more focused on, especially the flat pack is more focused on desktops.
Yeah, philosophically, they're it's great, but mechanically, they've got a way to go.
Do you think people who don't run Linux at all are like, what the heck are they talking about?
Yeah, well, of course, if they're on this channel, they've already unsubscribed, so it's fine.
Yeah, they figured that out a while ago.
It's very important that, like, we all, like, signal, like, do the whole signaling thing. It's like, ha ha ha, let's laugh at esoteric thing, and then the people in the comments are going to be like, ha ha ha, I too also enjoy esoteric thing. Shit, I gotta Google that.
Real quick, just real quick. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I thought with mobile and tablets and like that was going to be the future, and desktop PCs were it just wasn't looking good. Like, it was like the end of an era, and they were just going to become secondary to manufacturers. And something along the way changed, or directions didn't go that way. And desktop and laptop technology is cooler than ever right now.
You know what I think it was? Steve Jobs, was it, that came up and said we're entering the post-PC era.
Yeah.
With the iPad and stuff.
Post-PC era.
And that had me really worried for the future of the desktop as we know it. But as good as the CPU in the iPad Pro is, we can't run the same workloads on an iPad as we can on an x86 system yet. I suspect when Apple take ARM CPUs, which everybody thinks they will in the next year or two, put them in a proper laptop running Mac OS.
But then you also need you need GPU, you need disks. I mean, there's so many. It's not just the CPU, and they're gonna have to put a lot of ARM CPUs in there.
Yeah.
Well, Qualcomm has already demonstrated competent x86 hardware assist emulation.
Oh, no way!
And that is on like 3rd generation internally now.
Really?
Yeah, there was some, Intel made some sort of passive aggressive angry press releases, but Qualcomm's x86 emulation was not terrible. The other thing with the iPad is that the thing that blew me away with the new iPad Pro was 4K video editing. And so, like, you can do 4K video editing on the iPad, but there are very specific rules. It must be a very specific codec. Your special effects are limited to the ones that the hardware is designed for. And so there is a one-to-one, pretty much, relationship between the hardware and the software for that 4K video editing. And so it is a joyous, unbelievable experience editing 4K footage on an iPad, which is crazy.
In the right circumstances.
Yeah.
Except for getting the files onto and off of it.
Well, it works with a USB-C to SD adapter. You can just copy it directly now.
Sure, onto the iPad, but then what?
Yeah,
Well, then you render it and you spit out an MP4.
Yeah, but I like to keep everything,
or upload it to YouTube.
But YouTube will encode it.
It is like, as opposed to like using Adobe Premiere, it also sort of signals that Adobe's asleep at the helm. Like, they've been asleep at the helm for a long time, but they're like, not only are they asleep at the helm, they're side glancing that iceberg. Like, they didn't even hit it head on. If they'd hit the iceberg head on, they might have had a chance.
Yeah.
But it's like right now it's just scraping the hull, and they're taking on water, and the violin people are playing, and dude is still asleep in the captain's chair.
I know.
There's quite a few instances where Adobe are like that, though. Lightroom would be another one.
Yeah.
There's quite a few. Darktable is becoming a more and more viable alternative.
Yeah.
On Linux, there isn't really a single library management app that quite matches Lightroom yet, in my opinion, for photos.
Kdenlive is a perfectly fine experience with 1080p, but library hell and 4K, and when you're working with like 10-bit footage and the codecs aren't quite there, and there's a lot of external dependencies that I don't think are really the Kdenlive folks' fault, but it's not great.
That's the tricky thing about real video production on Linux is you can have a killer editor, but there's all of that underlying the audio and video subsystems like Pulse, like Video for Linux. There's the codecs that are licensed in some cases like ProRes, and they're just not that infrastructure isn't as good on Linux.
Yeah.
And it kind of like the iPad though, in certain circumstances with certain types of workloads.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's glorious. I honestly can't believe how good the iPad is compared to like x86.
I know.
And it's like, do we need to just add a bunch more instruction sets? Like, how is this doing this? And the answer is that they've built the silicon to work with that piece of software. Of course, the downside of that is if somebody comes out with some new cool special effect, you're not going to be able to do that on the ARM.
Right.
Like, it's literally not going to work. And if you do it in software, that's going to be a worse experience.
Could you imagine when that situation comes to PCs, which are not nearly as disposable as a tablet?
I mean, I think that with like video cards and video cards being as parallel processing capable, and Apple's got the new like accelerator card, which looks like an FPGA. It looks like Intel's Enterprise FPGA on. We'll see. We'll find out what it is. But
It seems very similar, huh?
if they could just, I think if Adobe was like, here, you can buy a $500 FPGA card and just plug it in, and all of the special effects and crap will run on that, people will buy that.
They absolutely would.
So, and if it only works with Adobe, it's like you're not really making a ton of money selling the hardware, but you're locked into that Adobe subscription. So why wouldn't you do it?
Mm-hmm. There's existing video editors on the market that have that model, and people spend a ton of money if it's their workload.
That is one thing I do appreciate about Apple, though, is that they will sell you a piece of hardware, and that is, it might be expensive, but the business model isn't designed to extract. Like, they're a hardware company that happen to make software.
For now, they're growing into services.
Well, with the TV streaming thing we talked about on the episode,
Right.
TV streaming service fatigue is real. I mean, Disney are launching a new one. Who else? There's Netflix. There's the CBS one.
All of them, Warner, HBO's got some new thing in the works. They're going to redo their multi-streaming. I mean, literally every major media company is working on a streaming thing.
Mm-hmm.
Apple was trying to do the a la carte thing with multiple different streaming services through iTunes, but I think that blew up in their face because they were too greedy.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it is definitely fatigue situation if you're, subscribed to Netflix and the Disney Plus, whatever the hell that is, and then the HBO thing, and then something else. I could see people valuing just subscribing to all those things through iTunes and managing the billing and the desubscribing through iTunes, and then consuming the media through iTunes. Like, Apple has the opportunity to have a really good value add there. I think that Apple strategically should have probably agreed to like a 0% commission to just control the space. And then I think that Disney and Netflix and whatever, they would probably have a better shot with their thing, one. But two, they would probably also not realize how much they're giving up by doing that, and it would be a better experience for consumers.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to marvel at Netflix for seeing this coming so many years ago, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they got into streaming, it seemed too soon.
It seemed like they were going to take that role that you just said about Apple. Like Netflix.
Yeah. Well, they probably would love to.
they were going to be this massive conglomeration of...
They have for a lot of back catalogs. It's just that people are so greedy. Look at like the little spat over Friends. Like they were trying to be the streaming service for Friends, and these companies are seeing, it's not that Netflix is making a ton of money. Netflix is there's a lot of money passing through Netflix's hands. They don't really get to keep as much of it as people realize, because content production is expensive. But the fact that Friends in syndication is worth like $1 billion seems like that's record breaking.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy, is what it is. It's crazy. And you know what's not interestingly coming up very much in these conversations, because we've had these off air too now, is YouTube.
Yeah.
Like their YouTube premium videos are just not really going anywhere.
No.
I've watched one series, Impulse. I watched Impulse, which wasn't bad, but
Google doesn't get it. Like they don't understand. Like, the people are so intelligent, they can't understand the needs of like normal people. And I think it was Carl Sagan.
Yeah,
it was Carl Sagan or somebody, and he's like, "Look, I get all the credit for being like super smart person, but like really, I am the dumbest scientist in the circle of scientist people. So like, I talk to my scientist friends, and they explain stuff to me, and I can understand, and then I explain it to the public. And so like, it's like, oh man, Carl Sagan really? I think it might not have been Carl Sagan, but it's like one of those.
Actually,
guys.
Sounds like Neil deGrasse Tyson's line.
Maybe, and it's like and everybody, explains it as a certain way, and I because I'm the one to explain it. It's like, oh, he knows what he's doing, and it's like, no, I have no clue.
Well, look at Woz and Jobs.
Yeah,
you've got to have that person who has the business clout and the business acumen, as well as the person who can actually get the stuff done.
Yeah, that's true.
Here's a fun sort of conversation in that same vein. In what ways is Steve Jobs like Linus Torvalds?
Oh, good one. Oh, wow, that's a good one. Well,
he's a bit sweary.
Yeah, they have a high emotional threshold, I guess you could say, or easily tripped emotional threshold. I feel Jobs is more design oriented, and Torvalds would be more engineering oriented.
Are those really different?
Ooh, you're getting even deeper now.
So Jobs is a product guy. I'm not sure that
It must work this way.
Yeah,
He's
like,
a must work this way guy.
Yeah.
no compromises. I don't know if Linus is also no compromises, but I've from what I read in the Jobs biography and stuff, it felt like he was kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Linus is probably much more pragmatic. Because, Linus, an example of that is he's owned MacBooks. He puts Linux on them, but he's owned MacBooks. He's been very practical about those kinds of things. He doesn't stand on some sort of, I will only buy a free-only machine that only runs free software. It hasn't ever been his thing. And, he's perfectly comfortable with Android, too.
So did Jobs change the world more than Linus, do you think?
No, I think that the magic of Steve Jobs is really Bill Gates explained part of the magic in a really interesting way, and it was it's like Bill Gates said, it's like I would imagine it as like wizardry. It's like I'm a lesser wizard and Steve Jobs is a greater wizard. And so I would go to these meetings, and Steve Jobs would just, do this song and dance and cast a spell, and it didn't work on me because I was a lesser wizard. But they would all just buy it and be like, "Yeah, sure, Steve, whatever you need money wise." And it was when I would have to get money for projects and things, it was a different situation because I was not as accomplished as a wizard. And so in terms of like changing the world, I think that Linus Torvalds' wizardry only works on very intelligent and very gifted programmer people. Like they're able to look at the craft and be so inspired by the craft in the kernel. Like just if you look at like there was that patch for the kernel, the submitted patch from one of the guys at Valve or one of the other people for the it's like the mutex callback thing that was making the Linux kernel a little more like Windows, because it was slower if you have a lot of things subscribed to a mutex or something like that. And the patch was not like perfect. And so of course the first reply is like, it is, this comment style is different than the kernel. This line length is wrong. This is wrong. We would not do this. Are we doing this?
Fixed, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just a long, and so every aspect of the Linux kernel has that level of engineering and commenting and like people poring over, an 80 line fix or an 80 line patch. And so I feel like Steve Jobs put that much obsession into things, and that is why he was an asshole a lot of the time. And Linus Torvalds certainly reads like an asshole on the mailing list, but people who understand what he's after can sort of understand and relate as to why he's an asshole. Whereas I think with Steve Jobs, it was not apparent to anybody other than Steve what he was going for, and whether or not it made sense is a whole other argument. But it seems like those behaviors come from similar motivations.
That's a very interesting observation. Two things that makes me think is, number one, there's probably a lot of value in being able to convince a room, especially when you're trying to herd a bunch of cats into one common mission or goal, like we're going to launch a product. Being able to get everybody on the same page is valuable. But at the same time, what Linus did is if you are capable of submitting a patch to the Linux kernel, you are working all of a sudden on a project that will touch millions of lives. Not that Apple software doesn't, but there's just no guarantee. You could go work at Apple and you could end up working on the Notes app that has no real impact on the world, right?
I'm responsible for the patch that took out the ability to search for tabs and line returns. Why did you do that, Apple?
Yeah.
You're the half a person that works on terminal.
The half a guy that works on terminal for Mac OS. Whereas with Linus, he created something that anybody with the right skill set and opportunity can work on it, and there is something very powerful about that. And I was thinking, if I was going to have a dinner with one of them, like if I could just snap my fingers and I'm at dinner and I'm having a beer, without even a hesitation at all, I would pick Linus.
Yeah, Linus Torvalds definitely for me too, because just more relatable and better. And I don't think
more of a real human being. I think
Yeah.
Jobs was probably very intense.
I think that it's interesting though, because on like where I'm going with all of this and like thinking about how all these relate, I think one of the things that's missing from the Linux desktop is that we need a Linus Torvalds or a Steve Jobs, either one of those people, in playing that role in terms of like the desktop Linux experience. And it's going to connect GNOME probably and application developers, and maybe even a little bit on the kernel side, and maybe a little bit in terms of like the scheduler and all of these different components of Linux. A conductor and an orchestra if you prefer.
Yes.
But that somebody in that role is what is needed in the Linux community, and there are some promising up and comers that are maybe going to do that. I don't know if it's going to be a commercial company that's going to employ that, but it seems like that person would have to come from the community first.
How do they not just get burned to the ground, though? Like, I think about Lennart Pottering.
Yeah.
Pulse Audio is so controversial, and yet it was so necessary. Before Pulse Audio, desktop Linux applications, only one application could play audio.
Yeah.
And then the whole card was used up. And we just forget about that limitation.
Systemd.
Yeah, Systemd also, I think, has been really good for orchestration, for server space, but also desktops.
It's funny. Systemd, the reason that Linux was not bootable on AMD processors recently is because there's something in the kernel with like the whole random number generator, and the AMD processors don't have a functional RDRAND that early in boot. There's not enough entropy, and so the kernel, like or Systemd just goes off on its own and is like, oh, the processor supports RDRAND. I'm going to call RDRAND a bunch of times, and it just hangs and doesn't work when you get the same random number over and over again. So like, is that a bug? Because it seems like Systemd should still work if you get the same
just
random
throw up
number.
an error and say, hey, by the way, this is an unsecure configuration.
Or something.
Yeah.
Because it's still a random number.
Yeah.
Even if it's the same one every time.
But, and so AMD has fixed that in their firmware at this point.
Oh, okay.
But that was why a large part of the, on newer processors, on older processors, is still broken. That was like a known thing. And so the kernel, there's a patch now for the kernel to, even though the CPU advertises it, it's going to turn it off, because of programs like Systemd that are just like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and use this, but then they don't really have any error handling around the processor handling that. And it's like the whole point of a kernel is to abstract away the hardware, that you don't have to worry about this stuff.
Right.
What are you doing?
Right. Yeah, I mean, Systemd is a tricky one, but it is a good, like, especially I think the Pulse Audio example is a pretty good one, because it does seem like it was necessary progress, it was necessary change, and now he's actually gotten death threats.
Yeah, that's not good. I do agree that Systemd we are in a better position than we were now. But the problem with, and I don't know how Linus Torvalds does it other than just like, I did the kernel go away. And so I don't know, is somebody else going to, single-handedly come up with a desktop environment to do that? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, your point's well taken too. It's not just the graphic stack. It's not just it's like all of these different stacks that all of the parts are there. They're just not being orchestrated correctly.
Yeah.
We were talking about earlier off air. We were talking about how a lot of Linux boxes are just a few small settings, and they're a little bit more performant for gaming, just with a few small tweaks that could just be set by default.
Yeah.
And there's projects out there like Gaming Mode to help with that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, Intel took it upon themselves to do Clear Linux.
Yeah.
Which has some dramatic performance improvements, and on the Intel platform, not so much on anybody else. Sorry, everybody else.
Some of the optimizations work on the other ones, but not all.
Yeah, and there are trade-offs from the optimizations that they've done, where it's like, oh wait, they did that. Oh, I need that in this other environment.
Oh, really?
And so it's not like super clear what they've done.
So just a warning to anybody that comes and sees this guy. I think I'm going to have to go down a rabbit hole of the Phoronix test suite now.
Oh yeah.
Because we ran some benchmarks on my
Surprise.
my Dual Xeon system at home, but then an i7-8700K system. And he was like, oh yeah, because I got like a minute 20 or something for a kernel compilation. And he was like, nah, it should be 80. should be a lot less anyway. And he then just went and got a drill, grabbed the drills, started dismantling.
Happen to have like the same motherboard you have just lying around.
I know, like I'm aware that we're actually in your space today, and
It was 82 seconds.
It was, yeah.
It's Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for nerds. This place is wonderful.
What CPU and motherboard setup do you have? Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. And then he opens this cabinet, and there's like an SSD just sat there, like a 2 terabyte Optane or something. It's
pretty great.
We needed
Crazy.
parts.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, it's true.
Integration testing. Whoa.
Yeah. No, it is really good though that you guys really actually genuinely go hands on. How much would you say of that kind of stuff actually ever makes it on air?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Really, honestly, not a lot.
There's probably a lot that goes into just every bit of analysis that actually makes it on air. There's hours off air.
Yeah. Well, and one of the challenging things with the, I think that I'm probably going to do more simpler and more accessible content. A lot of the content that I'm proud of is content where it has taken me a long time to figure out, and it's like, let me show you this thing so that you don't spend the same hours that I did figuring this out. Like, you need to go into this with this mental state, and then all of a sudden you can solve your own problem. Whereas, there are like content mills that are just like, oh, let's change some settings in GNOME. And that gets a lot of traffic. And actually, a lot of people do want to see that.
I know, it's surprising. I've had that same thought process. I'm like, really? This is working?
Yeah.
That is. But I really appreciate the ones where you've taken something that's like, these vendors are doing this implementation differently. This is the hardware support thing. These are the things you got to check to see if the motherboard supports. It's like, that just saved me hours of Googling.
That very first video of GTA 5 on Arch Linux. That's years ago now, but that was a real kind of, oh yeah, this is going mainstream.
Yeah.
Because before then it was real hacky and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've run that kind of a setup for probably 10 years. And now, I guess Valve is doing it the right way. I was very surprised, because the Proton people were like squirrely about taking donations. It was like, they're funded by corporate and they don't want to talk about it. And that is kind of the way that you got to do it. There's no better way to kill a project than to fund it. And Valve was sort of like, let's do this on the down low so that we don't get posers in here and like crazy people showing up that are just, trying to wreck the project. It's like, this person posted something offensive to Twitter 12 years ago. Let's shut down the project. And, Valve was just like, we're going to bypass all of that. And just like, the best thing we can do is just have these guys do stuff and not even worry about it.
And look what we got.
Yeah.
Going back to things that are getting me excited about computers again. Proton has been so awesome.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
What do you reach for first now? A Proton system or a VFIO Windows VM?
Well, for me, it's still Windows VFIO, but Proton is so functional that it is much less of a headache than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's getting the attention of folks like Linus Tech Tips and others that are like, this has just gotten a step easier for everybody. Now we can make videos about it. And then that's spreading awareness too.
Yeah.
Manjaro, Pop! OS, those two seem to be getting a lot of traction.
Yeah, I've been impressed with both of them. I did a setup for Manjaro for gaming on Manjaro. I think that video came out, and it was genuinely surprising how it's on the cutting edge less than the bleeding edge. So like the Arch GTA 5 thing, a little bleeding edge, a little bit more bleed than edge.
Yeah.
And
hold on. I love Arch, so be careful.
And I love to make fun of it these days, so that's great.
Yeah.
Manjaro was a little less on the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
So like on average, Arch is fine.
Yeah.
It's just there are some days where it's less than fine.
Yeah, there's some days where it'll break your gaming setup. That has definitely happened.
My laptop's a T480 running Manjaro with XFCE, and I get like 12 hours battery life on that thing.
Yeah, it's great.
Don't know if I get the same outcome if it was just a vanilla Arch. Maybe I should try that.
Yeah.
I think it's partially it's XFCE.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So it really helps with battery life. There's so many. That's what's so fun about it with Linux and stuff. There's just so many different configurations, and there's ways you can customize it and rabbit holes you can go down. So if battery life is what you want to focus on, that's an area you can focus on. Or for me right now, it's mostly performance is the area I want to focus on.
Yeah.
Faster.
Well, and it is a bathtub curve too, because I want it to be twice as fast. It's like, okay, that's going to be 4 times or more as much power. So if you want it to last 12 hours and you're cool with it running at half speed, that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or just give up on any good graphics. That's what I had to do.
XFCE, anyone?
XFCE, Intel graphics.
I'm going to shove a RTX graphics card in my thin and light notebook. Oh, the battery was dead in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You have right over there one of those RTX 2070 Supers, and it's
massive.
It's like a fish, right?
It makes a lot of heat.
It's this big.
I'm surprised it doesn't fall out of the slot. It's so heavy too.
Yeah, it's huge.
They do come with brackets,
Yeah.
so that you can properly support, because it will sag a bit.
I would imagine. Yeah, there's so many cool things around here to play with when it comes to video and discs. Lots of discs.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, lots of discs everywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of
Discs
spinning
everywhere.
rust.
So one of the things I really appreciate about you, Wendell, is that you your goal seems to be to forward, or paying it forward to other people. Trying to figure out this more complex kind of stuff and then communicate that in a bite-sized kind of fashion a lot of the time on the forums or through the YouTube videos. And I think those goals are very similar to what we're trying to do with this show, with self-hosted. So, I think there's definitely, it's hard to Google a complex topic when you don't know anything about it. And, the goal that you want to achieve is, say, running, the goal that I want to achieve is running a video game on my Linux box. Well, technically, if I'm running a Windows VM, am I still running a Linux box? But as a new guy, like you come to this with this goal that you want to achieve, this problem you want to solve, and you're like, well, where on earth do I start?
Yeah, but one of the things I like that you do, Wendell, is you also sort of convey like a thought model way to go after the problem. So even if it doesn't solve the exact thing I'm looking for, it gives me a frame of thinking to solve the problem or answer the question. And that's something I think we really want to try to do too, is we want to give people insight into our thought process, how we arrived here, the compromises we decided were okay to make, the ones we weren't willing to make, that kind of stuff.
One of the things we talked about in the show that we recorded this morning was not only the things that you do self-host, but also the things that you choose to put somewhere else, maybe in the cloud or have a service for. And I think that discussion is just as valid as why you choose not to self-host certain things is just as valid as why you choose to self-host certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can. I mean, when you really boil away all of like the technical stuff and like learning this and like if this tool or that tool or whatever, it really all goes back to just craftsmanship. I'm going to put craftsmanship into this aspect of my life, whether it's media library organization or how I organize my digital life or whatever. And so sometimes you don't really care. Like you just like the Walmart, like the cheapest thing ever, it doesn't matter. Cloud service, whatever, it's totally fine. But if it's like, okay, I need to manage my finances and I got to keep track of my bills, and like, is somebody trying to screw me on this, or did they raise the rates, or how does this work? And figuring out the minutia, like life is short, time is precious. So you want to spend as little time as possible worrying about all those things. So you put craftsmanship into building a system for that part of your life, and whether that system is digital or whether that system is what it, is mechanical in the real world, or like you get an inbox outbox for managing or whatever. But that craftsmanship is something that's with you 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And the sooner that we can get people that are just starting on this journey to think in terms of like, okay, is this something that's going to be with me for the next 50 years? Like, do I want to keep track of my family photos? I need to take it seriously, like my home movies.
Yep.
Do I really care about my Star Trek collection? Because I want to be able. I'm feeling
Star
really
Trek.
down today. I'm gonna have to watch Time's Arrow Part 1 and 2, and it's like, yeah, this is an adventure.
That's right.
This is amazing.
He gets it.
These guys are both Trekkies. I don't get it.
You got to try it out, man. Maybe you'll like it.
And so Linux gives you craftsmanship
That's really true.
in a way that no other operating system does, because it will live forever. I mean, like my dot files go back to before I was a teenager.
Wow.
And there's a lot of stuff in history, and it's not even really sentimentality. It's just that I spent the time to do this.
You've learned it. You
and
know
and,
it.
and to really do it right. And that's been paying it forward ever since I did this correctly, because I never have to worry about that again.
Do you think there's an element too that kind of just sort of opposite of our conversation, where it would be great if there was an orchestrator? Maybe one of the things about Linux that will make it successful long term is that nobody's commercial interest there's nobody that's just making a ton of money on like a Linux desktop right now.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems that Mac OS and Windows have faced, previous versions of Windows more so, is sort of being janked up by commercial sways in the marketplace when they're trying to chase the latest trend. Like Windows 8, for example, was a trend chase.
Yeah.
And seeing what Apple is doing to Mac OS often it's more of like an iOS-fication of the OS. And that's, again, to address market needs. But there's nobody really like that for Linux. It's just always going to exist. It's always going to continue to slowly get developed, or in some cases rapidly. And as maybe one day when the PC market does begin to dwindle, there'll still be people chugging away making Linux systems.
See, that's so interesting to me, because if you look at the kernel and you look at the craftsmanship in the kernel, that is, I mean, if you look at the engineering that went into like Roman roads and the aqueducts, and it is on the same level as the Linux kernel. I don't know that that's true of any other commercial operating system that we have today. And if you look at just something like the network stack in Linux is beautiful. It's literally a reference implementation for a lot of people. Windows, Microsoft, they couldn't get the network stack. Like, okay, so NT4, hot dumpster fire. Windows 2000, let's use FreeBSD's
Right.
TCP stack, which was there until very recently. And then finally they're like, oh, look, we fixed it. But a lot of the CVEs, a lot of the bugs in the Windows networking stack from stuff is because of stuff they introduced by throwing out the FreeBSD TCP stack. And so it's like they've had to reinvent the wheel all over again, when what would have been better for the world would be for them to just improve the FreeBSD TCP stack or OpenBSD TCP stack. I forget whichever version.
Pretty sure it was FreeBSD, but
It's the University of California, the Regents of the University of California. And that's why you have System 32 drivers, etc. hosts. It's like, what is this doing in here? And it's like, we're trying to hide the fact that, but the TCP stack on Windows was so terrible.
Yeah.
It would have been better for them to do that. Instead, it's like the Roman aqueducts. This is like the True Value aqueducts, and they've already collapsed and killed some people.
It's so true. Yeah. Yeah, well, and the Linux one has to last forever, and everybody's looking at it. So,
Yeah.
like, if you submit bad code, your name's on that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's for everybody to see.
Git blame is a real thing.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, it's all out there in public, good and bad.
Yeah.
Good and that's for the good and for the bad.
Yeah, so that kind of craftsmanship and engineering in an operating, like, I don't know that the GUI needs to have that level of engineering, but the stuff that it does with files and procedurally and locks and read before write and just all of the stuff that you run into that's user paradigm stuff should be robust enough that you can look at it and say, yes, this is craftsmanship. And I feel like too much of it is just, let's make it like Mac OS or let's make it like Windows, and that's fine to a point, but you don't end up with a more robust system
Or some real new innovation.
Yeah, well, you can think like i3. Like, i3 is glorious if you need that. And the command line is glorious. Like, the command line, honestly, the command line has gotten so much better over the last 10 years. And you've got really amazing projects like Tmux.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the CLI is great. But the CLI is, you have to learn how to speak the dialect. And that's fine, but I don't think we should require the general population to understand Tmux.
And they don't seem to be too enthused about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, they would be if they understood what it could give them, but...
Yeah.
Control BD. Something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
mean, because think about the average normal person that is like, wow, you mean I spent an extra 2 hours this Saturday and I solved this problem, and this will never ever be a problem again on any other system that I use or touch. Like, I will never have to worry about organizing this thing, or whenever this thing happens, it's completely automated. This will never be a problem for the entire rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
Or you can go to Best Buy and buy a little widget off the shelf that lasts 2 years and then rinse and repeat.
Yeah. They get cheap enough, I suppose. They
Yeah.
just might. And they're those little boxes are running Linux.
Yeah.
They run Linux.
Or they have an Arduino under the hood.
Yeah.
Well, you can have the best of both worlds. You can solve the problem, but you can build the interface to the cloud service, or build the interface to, the Chromecast, or build the interface to whatever the latest thing is, and you still have the lifetime solution problem, but then you also have the other thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like making furniture. Somebody in your family makes furniture and they're good at it. It's like, holy crap, this piece of furniture is legit amazing. Like this desk or this chair or this bookshelf or whatever.
That's what I mean. You normally think of craftsmanship,
Yeah.
but it's just in a different context.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a really good way to look at it.
It's clear talking to you that that's you. You're the furniture maker of
Yeah.
this place.
It's clear that I wish I were the furniture maker, and I'm studying it and looking, because if you look at what's happening on the Linux kernel mailing list and just the brilliance of that Mux patch, it is incredible. It is incredible, the engineering and the intelligence that goes into that, and it's super intimidating. And those people don't realize the level. I mean, they are Promethean in every sense of the word, and the only thing that's required for fire to spread is for people like us to point at that and say, look at this. This is pretty neat.
You're right.
10 points for using Promethean in a sentence.
Yes. That's the peak right there, I think, of the video. That's awesome.
Well, that's the end of the podcast.
How do you top that? Yeah, that's a really good point. And that does sort of tie in with what we do and with what you do too. There is some component it plays, especially with free and open source software. Spreading the word, getting knowledge out there on how to use it. For me, it's such a thrill just to see content made out there where I just tune in and sometimes it's a Linux box up on the screen still. Like, that to me is still,
Yeah.
just because there's so many things you can do out there that people just don't know about.
Or you get
So fun to
on a
tinker.
Delta flight and see the little tucks.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited about where things are going. I mean, it's just very nice because I thought by this time I'd be burned out, and I thought I would find it all too much hassle, and that I wouldn't want to be bothered by setting up my own services.
Linux is better than ever. You know, it's more approachable than ever. Things like containers, as we've talked about, close all of these different things. Close that last 10% to make it accessible for more and more people. And there was a comment you made a couple of minutes ago about, you know, the desktop necessarily or the UI doesn't need to be perfect, and I think I actually disagree. I think the closer we can get to a Mac OS kind of utility or a Windows style utility, UI that people are familiar with, the better, really. And there's projects like Ubuntu Mate that are doing really good work around this stuff. GNOME, it's not my cup of tea, but I get that other people like GNOME 3. Plasma is another one as well that's really polished. And probably the best and worst thing about Linux is that there's no focus. There isn't a desktop. There are 20, or more to choose from.
I think that I don't disagree with that. I think that the context is like the TCP stack implementation in the kernel is the product of a lot of evolution, and so like in the beginning there was a lot of code changes, and currently there are very small minor code changes, and so if you assume that the best user interface paradigms have already been invented, then small changes. But I'm not sure that the best user interface paradigms have been invented.
I agree.
No, I mean, look at the iPod, the way the click wheel revolutionized that particular piece of hardware.
Yeah.
Or the iPad Pro, for example, has, a scaled up iPhone interface for the moment, and that doesn't really fit that device, but it kind of works.
It could be that we've gotten the best paradigm you can get with a keyboard and a mouse.
Maybe.
I think it's down to software, and I think that again, like just a gifted architect, like doing the vision and building the thing, and then being enough of an asshole that everybody will follow and listen, is probably going to lead to stuff that we would have trouble conceiving.
Yeah.
But once we see it, it's like,
oh sure, yeah,
this makes perfect sense.
Well, look at Xerox and Apple stealing that whole user interface, right?
Yeah, and so maybe some company's going to invent that somewhere and be like, no, we must not release this, and then it'll get out anyway, because that's what happened with Xerox. Xerox spent $1 billion of 1970s dollars doing that, and then they just flushed it because they were like, we don't want to hasten the paperless office. And it's like, what? What? No.
Isn't that funny?
Short-sighted like Kodak, I guess.
Yeah, and think about an operating system that is designed to have all of your different devices work together without the evilness of the cloud, the evil aspects of the cloud. Not that the cloud is evil, but the evil
monitoring,
like
privacy.
The marketing people come in, and then it's like, let's make this as awful as possible, and then it ends up being a terrible user experience. But
unless
imagine
you're Ubuntu and have Amazon.
But I mean, that's the possibilities of something like that are super, super, super exciting. But if you were to ask me, like, what changes do I think the UI and stuff needs, things must. I don't want to say we need to throw everything out and start again. Because I'm not a believer in throwing anything out and starting again. I'm always like, we can translate this.
Because we always lose so much when you throw it out.
I want to completely rethink the way that we do the compositor. I want to lower the input latency. I don't want a one-frame compositor delay. What kind of engineering do we need to do in order to solve that? And those are very low-level problems. It's like, I can't fix that at the compositor level because we have to have a compositor because this thing is going to replace this other thing. There has to be a compositing layer. Yes, I understand mechanically that's how that works now, but not really. Let's fix it. Like, let's go deep. Whatever we need to do that in parallel. Let's do that on the GPU. But I want like microsecond, if not nanosecond, latencies in terms of like the way that the UI is composed and the way that the window gets its decorations and the way that the mouse input is handled, and like the time that I click or type a key, the system should respond immediately. Because an Apple II is almost an order of magnitude faster at responding to hitting the key and having the letter display on the screen than a modern computer.
Isn't that something?
Really?
Yeah. I've read that.
Why is that?
Because it's wired. The hardware is literally, but you get the USB delay, and then the software interrupt, and then the processor has to handle it. It's got to jump there in memory. The memory wasn't cached.
It's got to hand that up to your display server.
Is that a perceptible difference? If you put two side by side and did a blind A/B test?
So yes and no. Yes, it is, but at a barely conscious level. So like if you've ever used a phone that has like a 90 or 120 hertz refresh, and then you go back to another phone and it's like,
yes, he has.
I just used the OnePlus 7 Pro for a couple of weeks.
So it's like that.
And I've gone back to a OnePlus 6.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's I'm in the dark ages again.
You notice it once you notice it. Like once you've experienced it, you notice it.
Yeah. It's hard to go back once you've had high refresh rate.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that on my setup, because of the way that I do things, I tend to try to organize things into things that respond immediately. And so like I find that if I do something and then I have to wait on the computer for like 500 milliseconds, and then the computer does something and then I respond, that it really, really interrupts my train of thought and also makes me ambiguously frustrated. Like I'm just getting angry and I don't realize why. And then it's like, oh, it's because there's like an extra 500 milliseconds delay here, an extra 100 milliseconds delay. When I've got a relatively complicated procedure that I need to do, I'm just hitting shortcuts and typing really fast, and there's no delay from the stuff happening on the screen. But when there's something going on in the background, and it's like, that screen just took an extra half a second. That's all we're talking about. And it's like, this is a dumpster fire. I can't handle this.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. That's good. Because I felt like I was just being a little unreasonable.
My wife refers to it as nerd rage.
Yeah, you get that way too? I love it. Good. We can all start a support group.
So that's why the UI has to be like completely, and I think that's why a lot of people just instinctively it's like, oh no, I'm going to go deal with Tmux. And it's because your brain can run at full speed through the keyboard, and there's no interruptions or delays, and everything works. And I did there were a lot of like old paralegals and secretaries and stuff, and so they were working on like WordPerfect for DOS. And so I was witness very, very early in my career when I was nigh but a teenager, doing part-time work. It was almost a crime, because those people that were proficient at
were so much faster on the DOS version.
Yeah.
I witnessed that same thing in my early career.
Crazy.
And you move them to a GUI, and it slowed them way down.
Yeah.
And they were frustrated. Because they would know exactly boop, 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 and they would just blast through the UI.
Yeah. And
airline check-in agents still do the same thing. They're like...
Yeah.
And, modern Office has those same keyboard shortcuts, but it doesn't even bother to buffer it properly. So if you're like, I'm going to change the page layout and do this, and you actually bother to memorize that key sequence, even if you get the fastest computer in the world, if you don't wait for the visual cue for Word or whatever to be like, all right, I'm ready, it will just hang up or be weird.
Or just drop it.
Yeah, not work at all. Whereas, on those systems, even on DOS, you queue up this huge sequence of commands, and they might get that in and then take a sip of their coffee just as it's finishing building the letterhead or whatever. And it's a fundamentally different, and like we can fix that on Linux. It's just that you got to have that conductor orchestra asshole guy to actually do that.
Right, to make it a mission, a thing to fix. Yeah, that was something I witnessed, that I was the guy that was bringing in the GUIs, and I didn't appreciate that these people had been using a terminal for, I don't know, a long time, connecting back to a System 390 mainframe. So it was really old, and they were devastated.
Yeah,
they complained. I thought that was so ridiculous. What? We've upgraded you. We've upgraded. What are you talking about?
That was one of my biggest issues as a teenager. I used to go to my parents and say, "Oh, look, there's this cool thing you can do with X. Doesn't it? Like let's say it's an iPod versus a CD or something like that." And so all you do to get your songs on your iPod is you put the CD in the computer, you rip it, you encode them, and then you sync them to the iPod, and then you can listen to your music. And my dad walks over to his record player and is like,
all right, then let's just hit
puts
play.
The needle down and goes. And he's like, how is this better? And I'm like, well, I can listen to this anywhere and you can't. And he goes,
I got the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that element of it. I've recently been struggling to learn a new application, which it's not normally a challenge. Like I'll just rip through something new. I find it very interesting, but I'm trying to learn a new audio editor, and oh man, I felt like I was back in the shoes of those people that I was switching their desktops. So I've just recently been thinking about this and how I felt like, man, I appreciate, when I was a kid, I could not appreciate like the dramatic change in their workflow. But
Reaper?
Yeah, trying to get deeper into Reaper. Great tool, but very complex.
It always bothers me when I encounter people in my career that are fine to just do it the way that they've always done it, instead of thinking like, I know how to do this. How can I do this faster?
Where's your sense of adventure?
Or just want to enhance or improve. Or
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you do get yourself into trouble. I mean, I've gone down a rabbit hole where it's like, oh, it's 8 hours later, and on this 3-hour task, and this is a boondoggle.
That's those hard lessons learned right there.
But the journey is the part of the destination. Sometimes the journey is more fun than the destination.
That's true.
Sometimes those become YouTube videos. Sometimes not.
That's true. Sometimes it's content. Sometimes you just gotta call it a loss.
A lot of the time, though, it is up to the individual to find that inspiration, because you know
That's what I'm lacking.
and that's also one reason that I'm sort of discouraged from doing a video on some of those things, because it's like, I'm going to do a video on this, and it's like, this is an amazing thing that's going to save me a ton of time, and somebody's going to look at it and be like, here's a better way, or not really a better way, but it's like, let me solve a slightly different problem that is in my imagination better. And it's like, well, I mean, that's great, but are you doing this to improve your own life, or just to like virtue signal on the internet?
Right.
Because those are different things.
But then you've got to support it as well. Often, if you write an article series or something like that, you'll end up with comments for years. Like,
Yeah, we did the Linode series, and that actually worked out. I was fine to spend the time to support that, because the referral income from that was pretty good. But we still get a lot of questions on that, and there's no referral income from that anymore, and that's disappointing.
You want to say, just look at the date.
Yeah.
Look at the date of that. Then just check that out before you ask. A lot of people do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you guys want to plug where we can find you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the show is at selfhosted.show.
Selfhosted.show/subscribe.
Chris is at Chris LAS. The show is at Self-Hosted Show on Twitter. I'm at Ironic Badger, and you can also find me at linuxserver.io.
Exactly how is Badger ironic?
Oh, right. So that was a forum, a piece of forum software about 5-10 years ago that just generated me a random nick. And then I got the badger.com avatar. And ever since then, it's just been Ironic Badger. So
Nice.
I imagine it's like a database with just a bunch of random words, and then they just match it with the word badger.
Yeah.
Happy badger, ironic badger, silly badger.
Epic Badger.
And of course, you can find loads more Jupiter Broadcasting content at jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Yeah, come check out our Linux podcast. We got those.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Good plugging.
Thank
You
you.
got it down, Alex.
Well, here's to going self-hosted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Self-host all the things.